Ramabai, thank you. Sorry, can I just check to see if I can hear you quickly?
Okay, this
Awesome.
looks the same as the last one, right? Because I'm using another computer.
Yep, you're all good.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. So you can go now, and I'll see you after.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Ramabai.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
On a Zulu mountain, I was standing, gazing at cloud. When I saw the crowd, the cloud started expanding. Then I heard a chanting, drum beating for soul, coming from below. Bibing, 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 bibing. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Timo Farrell, Alafia, Timo Farrell, me no fire, waiting me by the riverside. Me a come up, ayo. Come to me direct, mama. Me a look at me, they inside, mama. Alafia, Orumile, Oshun, yeah. We are coming back home now. Far out of the mountain, Zulu below dancing and beating the drum, beckoning to come. I started to tremble to see Zulu assemble on the plains below and chanting ayo. Bibing, 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 bibing. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Timo Farrell, Alafia, Timo Farrell, Alafia, Timo Farrell, Timo Farrell. Ayo. Hey, Babana, hey, me want the at Yuru. Are you coming me now? I'm your show. Oshun, Ile, Imeye, Ire, Omuliba, Alafia, Odigba, Yawati, Yakomiri. Asanta Sili, mama. The drums had me going, me body start shaking to the vibrations coming from the drum. There's nothing I could do but to join the Zulu, so I start to chant to the Zulu chant. Bibing, 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 bibing. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Ayo, way far, way far, way far. Now they address me as Her Majesty. They say me music sweet, it make what it wants to be. It has this way to jump on Carnival Day. The brass taking the load, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the road. Everybody hush, they say it was brainwash. Our Lord Kitchener is all they does here. The statement is not true. Plenty people lost their shoe. It was my new beat made trouble on the street. Now they address me as Her Majesty. They say me music sweet, it make what it wants to be. It have this way to jump on Carnival Day. The brass taking the load, they call me Queen, Queen, Her Majesty, Queen of the road. Little children lose their mom and friend. It was my new beat, but because of it, Mama when I took me bum, exploring all over town. They catching a glad with the new beat of Trinidad. So now they address me as Her Majesty. They say me music sweet, it make what it wants to be. People could jump on Carnival Day. With the brass taking the load, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the road. Just to get a vote, I had was to drop high notes. They ball a lot, Lord, listen to sweet chord. The bus could not resist, the bus wake up the tourists. They went in like mad to the road march of Trinidad. Now they address me as Her Majesty. They say me music sweet, it make what it wants to be. It have this to the jump on Carnival Day. With the brass taking the load, they call me Queen, Queen, Her Majesty, Queen of the road.
forgetting that my constitution is strong. Instead of respecting my long, long reign,
They making plot to take down my name. I've been breaking down walls ever since I was small. They could stand up tall and strong like a wrecking ball. I would knock them down. They say that I carry too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting me long, long reign, they making plot to take down my name. Everywhere I reign supreme, the one and only Calypso queen. No man alive or dead could man come and take the crown off my head. Them foolish and petty men, I don't worry about them. They've been trying to take me down, but to the end I retain my crown. They say that I reign too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting me long, long reign, they making plot to take down my name. They used to call me small island girl. Now I travel the world. Anywhere they go, they know I am Calypso Rose, queen of Calypso. Calypso Rose is still singing on. They say that I reign too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting me long, long reign, they making plot to take down my name. Which foreigners don't know. I passed through depression and starvation to be where I am in my profession. So Tobago, I am thankful to you. I wouldn't be ungrateful. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. I thank my mother, my school teacher, my neighbor, my brother and my sister. So you see, Tobago, I thank thee. Recognized anywhere you go. I am sure you'll be more than glad to know that the mother of Tobago is Trinidad. I thank Trinidad for its protection through 1970 revolution. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. I thank Trinidad for my education, making me Tobago most recognized woman. So you see, Trinidad, I thank thee. Queen of Calypso. I am not forgetting Barataria, the place where I grew with my adopted mother. I can't forget my fans who support me in my profession. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. And to the Baptist religion who gave me so much wisdom, glory be, I thank thee. The Prime Minister I cannot make absent, who took me safely through independence. And I cannot forget the mighty sparrow, he established me name through Calypso. I thank all the musicians who play my Calypso on brass and pan. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. And to the nation, to honesty, for making me the road march queen. So you see, I thank thee. You marry this woman and take she home, leave she all alone. Looking for something on the outside when you have inside. If you don't stay home and take care of your wife, some guy could come from behind and he could destroy your life. Who she call on the phone when she all alone? Simon. Who feed the pussycat milk? Simon. Who pump the nail with his hammer? Simon. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. You play smart, pushing the ads about telling lies, giving expensive jewel to this woman who is not your wife. And the wife at home and getting nothing. As you turn your back to Simon, give him something. Who sit in your chair, drinking your beer? Simon. Who turn on your radio, take off the video? Simon. Who dip his pen in the ink? Simon. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Lord, Simon sweet. The wife gets pregnant, you're feeling happy. You give big, big party. The wife best friend call she and tell you is not the daddy. Then you leave to roam, leaving she alone. The side mothers come and teach you how to blow saxophone. Who give you a 6 for a 9? Simon. Who say the child isn't mine? Simon. You fattening cow for the butcher? Simon. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Simon sweet. Lord, Simon sweet. You men out there listen me and take warning. Don't believe when you out there cheating your wife and horning. It's like tit for tat, and that is a fact. It's time to pay some respect and stop the damn cheating act.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Rose Among Thorns, on Calypso Rose's life, music, and impact. My name is Dana Seitler, and I'm the director of the Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies. I want to thank Rhoma Spencer for organizing this amazing event. Rhoma is the 2022-23 Artist in Residence at the Queer and Trans Research Lab that we house here at the Bonham Center, where she is working to create a musical on the life of Calypso Rose to be staged in June. I also want to thank Caribbean Studies and the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto for co-sponsoring this event. As well as Christopher Smith, Elliot Tilachek, and Victoria Liao for all of their labor in making the event happen. Please also allow me to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto settles. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. It is also subject to the Dish with One Spoon agreement. We are all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or in generations past, and those who came here involuntarily, particularly forcibly planted Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work on this territory and to share space with all of you. I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, Dr. Ramabai Espinet. Dr. Espinet is Trinidadian by birth and now lives in Canada. She is a writer, critic, and academic. She was for many years a professor of English at Seneca College, a post from which she retired recently. She continues to lecture in the Caribbean Studies program at the University of Toronto. Ramabai Espinet's work includes a novel, The Swinging Bridge, poetry such as Nuclear Seasons, Indian Robber Talk, and she is the editor of Creation Fire, an anthology of Caribbean women's poetry in several languages, containing the work of 121 poets. She presented a paper on Calypso at the World Culture Forum in Brazil in 2004, and she has been a Calypso judge in Toronto for several years. Her interest and enthusiasm for Calypso is a lifelong passion. Please welcome Dr. Ramabai Espinet.
Thank you, Dana. And I'm so proud and happy to be here today. Welcome everyone for taking the time on a busy Saturday in October to share your presence with us in this symposium, deliberating on the creative work and the legend embodied in the person of Calypso Rose. This symposium, Rose Among Thorns, has been convened and organized by Rhoma Spencer in her role as 2022-23 Artist in Residence at the Queer, Trans and Research Lab at the University of Toronto. Calypso Rose was born in Bethel Village, Tobago. Her birth names are Linda MacArthur, Monica, Sandy Lewis. She has composed more than 1,000 songs and recorded more than 20 albums. A Calypso star of international renown, she's also an activist for women's empowerment and equality among human beings, with a keen eye for the predicament of the underdog. All the while, her air for the piquant, the risque, the stuff of double entendre is always foremost in her mind. The witty play of language that makes her lyrics come alive. As one of our presenters will describe it, the wajang quality in Rose's disposition and her creative output would never and could never be suppressed, malgré tout. Rose began writing songs at the early age of 13. Her influence on the world of Calypso is profound, both on the genre itself and in the structure of competition in the Calypso arena. It was Rose who caused the renaming of the Calypso King competition to that of Calypso Monarch, when she won the competition twice. Her formative years were spent in Tobago with her parents, where her father was a leader in the Spiritual Baptist Church. She grew up there in a large traditional family and recalls with pleasure the early times with her grandmother, who recalled her own history of being kidnapped from French Guinea. Rose's move to Trinidad at 9, when she was adopted by her aunt and uncle, changed her life. Her aunt, Edith Robinson, loved Calypso, and Rose was exposed to a different world, one in which she was allowed a great deal of freedom. Prior to this, her father had often proclaimed that Calypso belonged to the devil. Rose was fortunate, too, to meet Lord Kitchener at the young age of 9. Kitch was a profound influence on her, recognizing her as a composer and encouraging her eventually to perform in his tent. Early on, she adopted the sobriquet Crusoe Kid, a salute to her Tobago origins. But when she moved to the Young Brigade tent run by the Mighty Sparrow, her name changed to Calypso Rose, a name that she inhabits fully, as many of us who have loved her work for years can attest to. Rose hit the big time in Trinidad and internationally with Fire Fire in My Wire in 1966. This calypso is familiar to many on a global scale and has been translated into several languages. Calypso Rose is outspoken on social issues and has inspired many women long before the Me Too movement by example. She has been straightforward about the impact of her own experience of sexual assault, and later, in her 70s, came out publicly as a lesbian. Her struggles notwithstanding, her sense of place, her love of fun, her skill with witty commentary, and her spatial command of the performance stage remains undiminished. She has collaborated and performed with many musicians, including the Mighty Sparrow, Bob Marley, Machel Montano, Manu Chao, and many others, far too numerous to mention. In 1982, Rose was named an honorary citizen of Belize because of her efforts to raise the cultural profile of Belize internationally. She's also named by UNICEF as a Goodwill Ambassador for former child soldiers. Her album, Far From Home, brought her the honor of the Victoire de la Musique Award in Paris in 2017. Another of our presenters will speak about Rose in France. The film Calypso Rose, Lioness in the Jungle by Pascal Obolo was produced in 2011. An inspiration to many, Rose's music will always get you to your feet. Women must dance, as her lyrics declare over and over. How deep-seated that metaphor is in terms of women's command of their lives, their persons, their sense of wholeness, strength, and pleasure. One cannot begin to estimate. Calypso Rose reaches out to all of humanity, and this symposium and its presenters, who have thought long and hard about the scope of her work, gives her the honor she is due by the papers they are sharing with us today. Calypso Rose, lioness, fighter, and creative woman, we salute you today and honor the mighty labor of music and love that is your life's work. And so we begin these deliberations with our first presenter, Dr. Alison McCletchie. Dr. Alison McCletchie is an assistant professor at South Carolina State University. Her research interests includes race, ethnicity, economic inequality, calypso, religion, Caribbean carnivals, HBCU campus cultures, La Divina Pastora, and Caribbean Catholic music. Some of her recent publications include the co-edited book, Contributions of Historically Black Colleges and Universities in the 21st Century, a co-authored paper, Perceptions of COVID-19 and a Sample of Female Clergy, January 2022, in Christian and COVID-19 Pathways for Faith, celebrating Caribbean American identity in the Southern US. The Researcher, an Interdisciplinary Journal, Volume 30, Number 1, Spring 2020, and the Holy Temple of Soka, Reverend Rudder in Attendance. In Vanessa Valdez, editor, The Future is Now, a look at African diaspora studies, which was published in 2012. Dr. McCletchie was the 2019 Saul O. Sidor Lecturer, Plymouth State University in New Hampshire, and the Cheryl Herrera Memorial Lecturer for the Conference on Theology in the Caribbean Today, 2019 and 2016, respectively. With the George Buddy Wingard, she completed the documentary We Came a Long Way by Faith, Catholic Hill, and St. James, the Greater Catholic Church, in 2020. The title of her presentation is Her Majesty, Exploring Wajang Feminist in Calypso Rose's Work. Please welcome Dr. Alison McCletchie.
When I was a master's student, I decided to study the phenomenon of La Divina Pastora, the Black Madonna of Siparia, even though I had lived my first 27 years in Trinidad and Tobago. I had never visited the church where La Divina is housed, but I remember seeing something about her on the television show Gael. Therefore, when the time came to select a topic for my thesis, I chose La Divina. Topic selected, I had no idea what my approach would be. Consequently, I read all I could about her and talked with people who had written about her or lived in the community. One of these people was a Catholic nun who, during our conversation, warned me not to try a feminist approach to my study. This caution I interpreted not based on a conservative worldview on the part of the religious sister. Rather, I thought it was because she understood that since I was studying in a university in North America, the feminist scholars I was reading about could not, in her opinion, be used to understand the experiences of women in the Caribbean. My final approach to La Divina did not involve a feminist framework. However, this conversation stayed with me because as I continued in my studies, and now as a university professor, I find myself reflecting on that conversation. In the North American Academy, we consider first wave and second wave feminism, as well as the womanist paradigm. But I have never found these approaches sufficient when examining the Caribbean, and more particularly Trinidad and Tobago. As a Caribbean scholar living and working in the US, specifically the US South, where Bajan planters helped establish the plantation economy and their descendants initiated the Civil War, I find myself constantly agreeing with Khan that the Caribbean is the master symbol. Khan's claim reflects the work of other Caribbean scholars, Mintz, Nettleford, Hall, Brathwaite, M.G. Smith, and Williams, who all remind us that the history and development or underdevelopment of the Caribbean is tied to the history of the world. This geographically tiny area helped enrich European nations of Europe, contributed to the development of the capitalist economic system, transformed or created new cultural expressions, and was the point of contact for various ethnic groups who previously had little contact with each other. In this frontier space, indigenous Americans, along with peoples from Europe, Africa, various parts of Asia, and the Middle East, were all forced because of conquest, colonization, and capitalism to create a new culture. One of the artifacts of this culture is La Divina, who I maintain is a Dogla Madonna, to whom multiple faith practices turn for help and comfort. She is one of many examples of how contact between various groups have led to the development of something new and unique that serves the people of the Caribbean. Calypso is another such example. Born of the contact between the African griot and the French chantuelle, the music has changed over the years to include the rhythms of people who settled in the Caribbean, as well as many places Caribbean musicians have traveled to. This paper considers some of the work of Calypso Rose, one of the most famous female calypsonians, and maintains that her career and catalog reflects the complexity that is the life of Caribbean women and the female performer in what has traditionally been a male space. Adopting this approach allows us to grapple with the complexity of Caribbean womanhood, which is a unique response to historical, social, economic, and political factors that have shaped it. To understand this complexity, we must first acknowledge that for most of Caribbean history, since first contact with European explorers, women, especially Asian, African, and indigenous women, were considered property and workers, much like their menfolk. Even some European women were expected to work alongside their men in the fields or shops. This meant that for a large proportion of the female population, the ability to access and enjoy a relaxed lifestyle where their tasks were contained within the house was denied to them. The conditions of the plantation economy demanded that women were required to work as hard as their men, often in the fields, factories, or shops, while providing sexual access to their enslaved or indentured partners, as well as the planters and overseer class, and also birthing and raising children to replenish the worker class. The plantation system required the dehumanization of indigenous, enslaved, and indentured. And it can be argued that for women, this dehumanization was compounded because of the use of sex as violence, but also because she and her male partner were in constant fear that their families, however constructed, could be torn apart by the planter. These were the conditions enslaved and indentured women lived under. These are the conditions which they had to respond to, even if psychologically, to maintain their dignity and self-respect. Physical resistance and rebellion were not tolerated by the plantation system, but women found ways to reclaim their humanity, even if it was a small action, like using a headscarf or deciding not to give birth to a child. It is important to remember that the plantation system created, implemented, and controlled by Europeans was imposed among peoples who came from cultures that did not share these values. In fact, some of these cultures were matriarchal, so the roles and freedoms afforded to women were very different. Many of these groups did not limit gender to two categories, and their conception of family was more inclusive than the single family, male-headed household that emerged as the standard among middle-class Western Europe. This is the complicated, nuanced culture that informs the creation of Calypso and foregrounds the Trinidadian society that shapes Calypso Rose and shapes her song selection and performance style. This paper maintains that Rose's songs and performances reflects the complexity that is the life of women in the Caribbean, the navigation between public and private spaces, always under the Eurocentric gaze of elites and their satellites, who act as gatekeepers to various social institutions important for economic and social mobility. Her musical catalog includes several soca or party songs, as well as the more traditional serious calypso. There are even some songs that are a successful blend of both. Her live performances demonstrate her musicality, but often include a playfulness that is not always demonstrated by other female calypsonians, who either take on the persona of the soca queen or that of the spiritual mother. Rose's early professional life begins in the mid-1950s, an important time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. This post-World War II period saw the territory, along with other colonial dependencies, start discussions about the possibility of self-governance and political independence. At the time, civil rights movements were taking hold in the United States, tied to the rights of racial minorities. Globally, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people were engaged in struggles for freedom. There are parallels between many of the social changes of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and more recently of the past 10 years to Rose's own career. This paper does not claim that Rose is a catalyst for these changes, but rather that her music, life, and career reflects the experiences of many Trinbagonian women and the local feminist movement, and the particular understanding of female liberation that is grounded in a complex social reality. The concept of Wajang feminism is not one that exists in the scholarly literature. Rather, it is my clumsy attempt to describe the feminism that I have observed that is unique to Trinbago. When I think of a Wajang, I think of a person, often a woman, who gets creative, sometimes even loud, and abandons polite behavior when cornered or trying to make her voice heard. To me, a person acts like a Wajang. They are not a Wajang. This action is a temporary state, which is summoned when needed. It is not a permanent characteristic, but an emotional space one can go to when needed. It is an act of defiance against the status quo. Wajang feminism reflects the fact that most Trinbagonian women, regardless of class or ethnicity, like their mothers and other maternal ancestors, were workers within the plantation economic complex. These women live in a society governed by Eurocentric patriarchy, and whether working in a field, shop, or running a plantation, they were required to contribute to the economic well-being of their families, bear and raise children, be the primary caregiver to their families, all while conforming to a respectability paradigm that was unrealistic in the Trinbagonian space. The demand society places on women means that they are expected to suppress their feelings and desires and ambitions for the good of their family and community. The relative smallness of the society means that for women and their families to experience upward social mobility, they need to understand and follow the norms that requires them to be all things to all people, constantly putting themselves last as they raise their children with or without the support of a spouse, care for their parents and elderly kin, provide material support for their families, and be the spiritual centers of their household. Wajangism, I contend, emerges in those times and on those occasions when the women find it is necessary to assert their presence and voice loudly and publicly, when they must remind their community, family members, co-workers, etc., that politeness does not equal weakness. This paper suggests that Rose's performances, songs, career, and life illustrate Wajang feminism. It does not claim that Rose is the only or first example of this, but rather she serves as an example of it. Consider first Rose's onstage signature dance move, the one where she pauses, lifts her top a few inches, and does a little whine. In just this simple action, Rose reminds the audience of her femininity and her sexual prowessness. In an earlier period, and certainly in the 1950s when Rose began her career, moves like this would be considered unladylike and inappropriate. But compared to many of the performances today, this is tame. This dance move also encapsulates the contradiction of Trinidadian society. Even though we are home to the greatest show on earth, Carnival, overt public displays of sexual behavior is still frowned upon. Certainly, many female soca artists, as part of their onstage performance, include an explicit whining demonstration as part of their show. But this was not the case for many performers of Rose's generation. Rose's signature dance move is representative of what many women who embrace their sexuality but do not feel the need to display it publicly. They know how to whine. They like to whine, but they do their whining in private. The Wajang feminist can also embrace both her serious and silly sides. Consider Rose's musical catalog. The Road March winner and one of the early pioneers of soca music and the first female Calypso monarch. For many female Calypsonians, this ability to move between soca and the Calypso world has not been an easy one. In fact, very few have done it effectively and for a long period of time. For various reasons, traditional Calypso has become separated from soca music and its many sub-genres. Rose's catalog is an illustration that the singer does not have to choose one style over the other. Songs like Fire, Fire, and Tempo, her early soca hits, can be contrasted with Balance Wheel and Her Majesty, where she demonstrates her ability to include danceable rhythms while delivering serious messages. It can be argued that she was in fact just following the pattern of many of the leading male Calypsonians of the day. But when we look at contemporary women performers, there seems to be a divide between the soca queen and the earth mother. Wajang feminists are also risk takers. Considers Rose's initial decision to enter the Calypso world. Given the conservatism of Trinidadian society, along with that of her own family, and the seedy and predatory nature of the entertainment industry, this was a precarious career choice. This decision reflects the lives of many women who challenged the status quo to achieve their goals. Her willingness to pursue her dreams led her to becoming the first woman to word Rhone March and later the Calypso monarch. While these achievements cannot be brushed aside, her risk-taking extends to her ability to form new partnerships and collaborations, which is illustrated in her more recent albums and releases. The plantation economy, although it was formed on and needed the labor of women as much as it relied on men, nevertheless demanded that women be silent and invisible. This is necessary because the Judeo-Christian capitalist and patriarchal foundations of the society that emerged from the plantation complex also held that women should only occupy the private space of the house. The economic reality of the society was, and still is, contradicted by the social norms it professes to hold as ideal. Wajang feminism understands this contradiction and knows that they must find ways to circumvent these conservative norms that limit their ability to self-actualize. This paper is an attempt to think through and begin to develop an idea that has been with me for several years. I firmly believe that while there is value in understanding the various waves of feminism and the idea of womanism, Caribbean society in general and Trinidadian society in particular need a different framework to understand and describe the role and place of women in the region. During my dissertation research, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that my high school was the oldest high school in Trinidad and Tobago. For more than 185 years, this school has been educating girls and has remained one of the schools many parents hope their girls will attend. What I found troubling was that there was an absence of women in general in the public offices my work examined. That is the Judiciary, National Senate, and as board members of prominent businesses, including banks and insurance companies. Our women have long had access to education, but they have been participants in the economy from laborer to business owner. But there are still structural barriers rooted in cultural norms that demand their invisibility. This paper on Rose does not make the claim that she is the only or even the best example of Wajang feminism. There are other examples in the Calypso world, like the United Sisters, who gave us Wo Donkey and Amber Tyler Woman. The decision of these women to perform together was pioneering, and through their on-stage performance, they pushed back against the stereotype of the catty, competitive woman who is unable to support other women. As individual performers, they have also had distinguished careers. A more recent example of a Wajang feminist, however, does not come from the Calypso world. The Facebook profile known as Ali Berry and her response to the dress code implemented by the central bank is an example of a Wajang feminist. Denied entry because of a sleeveless dress, she returned to the building, draped in a shower curtain which she had in her car, in order to conclude the business she had come to the bank to perform. This reaction to a parochial and classist concept of what is respectable is typical of Wajang thinkers. In order to achieve their goals, they find creative ways to comply when confronted by barriers. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. That was wonderful. And I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Andel Gossain. Dr. Andel Gossain will present Rose in France. Andel is Professor of Environmental Studies and Justice at York University in Toronto. Dr. Gossain's publications include contributions to many journals, including Small Acts, Wasafiri, Sexualities, Topia, Caribbean Review of Gender Studies, and Art in America, and many scholarly anthologies as well. His artwork has been exhibited internationally at various galleries and museums, and he most recently curated the exhibition Everything Slackens in a Wreck at the Ford Foundation Gallery in New York. Dr. Gossain's new book, Nature's Wild, Love, Sex, and Law in the Caribbean, was recently published by Duke University Press. Please welcome Dr. Andel Gossain.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ramabai. I have to start off by saying not just thank you, but congratulations to our esteemed band leader today and our artist in residence, Rhoma Spencer. I have been so delighted to see the spotlight shine on you and your many talents over this past couple of years, especially. I just want to say it's about high time. Toronto is very graced by your presence in the city, and I'm so honored to call you my friend. And thank you too for allowing me to share in this moment of appreciation for your fellow icon, Calypso Rose. So I'm here first and foremost as a longtime fan of Calypso music. Really, it's all I listened to from childhood right to adulthood. And of course, as a fan of Calypso Rose. Now, my contribution today will consider just one moment in Rose's illustrious career, the release of her 2016 album, Far From Home in France, and the subsequent embrace of Rose by French media, the French music industry, and the public at large. I want to use my time today to begin to think through some aspects of this still unfolding turn in Calypso Rose's career, of finding success in France with a series of collaborators that have influenced and produced a new sound. The pinnacle of this experience so far was the night of February 11, 2017, when following her performance of a nearly 10-minute set, complete with an encore, she received the Victoire de la Musique Prize, what is often called the French Grammys for Best World Music Album. And here is a brief collage of a performance and her claim of that prize that night. So you'll see in the video, she begins performing one song and then it turns into Leave Me Alone. I'm not showing the whole clip. She sang for over 10 minutes, which is quite a lot for a award show performance. And then she was asked to do an encore of Leave Me Alone. And then finally, you'll hear a short excerpt of her acceptance speech.
They say that I went too long, but reckon that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting me long, long reign, they making threat to take down my name. I've been breaking down walls ever since I was small. They could stand up tall and strong like a wrecking block. I could knock them down. Oh yeah! They say that I went too long. Oh yeah! And the Constitution is strong. Tell them that they give me long, long reign. They make it plan to take down the name. Everywhere I reign so green. You wanna know the Calypso queen? No man alive or dead could come and take the crown of my head. Oh! Those foolish and petty men, I don't me down, but to the end I retained my crown. They say I'm not way too low, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. They are respecting me long reign. They make me proud to take out the name.
Oh, le gaz, la pêche, l'énergie. Et on n'en veut pas encore un petit peu quand même. Est-ce qu'on n'en veut pas encore un tout petit peu? Calypso, Calypso, please. Calypso Rose, on m'entend pas du tout. Calypso,
Merci beaucoup.
please. Please, madame. Please. Could you give us a little bit more?
Sure.
Oh yeah! Est-ce que vous pouvez nous en donner un petit peu plus? Vous voulez un peu plus de Calypso Rose, le Zénith? Bien sûr, évidemment. Parti.
Leave me, let me free up. Let me trouble, let me
Les fans français qui sont ici et le public du Zénith.
Amazing Grace. How sweet the song. I am happy to receive the Victoire de la music tonight. My great grandmother was from French Guinea.
Alors sa grand-mère était de Guinée
And
française
she will be proud of me tonight to receive this auspicious award.
et elle serait ravie ce soir de la voir recevoir ce prix.
I want to thank my fans all over the world.
Elle veut saluer ses fans tout autour de la planète.
I want to thank because music.
Elle veut les saluer à cause de la musique.
I want to thank my agent,
Elle veut saluer son agent,
Azumat.
Achomat, je crois.
I want to thank.
Elle veut remercier, elle veut remercier, elle veut remercier. Elle veut remercier
Jean-Michel, my agent.
son agent
from
Jean-Michel
France.
en France.
I want to thank my government of Trinidad and Tobago and all my fans all over the world.
Et donc elle veut remercier toute sa communauté de fans à
They
travers le
have
monde.
kept me going
Il l'aide à continuer
with the beautiful music and the vibrations I give them.
avec la belle musique et les vibrations qu'elle leur donne.
Now, Calypso Rose's Far From Home album sold very well in France, landing in the top 10 charts and becoming certified gold and then platinum. I actually own 2 editions of the album, the one that was released at first and then the deluxe re-edition with bonus tracks following her victory at Les Victoires. And I think there may even be a 3rd version. It is not at all surprising to me that Rose found market success and critical acclaim in France once she was properly introduced there. Something that I really immediately noticed and appreciated about France when living as a graduate student in Paris in the early 2000s was its very enthusiastic embrace of what was called world music, or music of the global South. There was so much more diversity in the popular music culture that I had ever experienced or since experienced in any other city which I lived. And I'm talking especially about what you hear on top 40 radio. So not London, not New York, not Toronto, but on a top 40 radio music station in Paris, you could hear Britney Spears, followed by the Algerian musician Khaled, and then maybe Janet Jackson, and then maybe the Egyptian singer Natasha Atlas, and then perhaps one of France's chanteuses like Lara Fabian, and then you'd hear maybe Senegal's Youssou N'Dour. And this was a very interesting and sort of common characterization of the sort of top 40 radio culture in France. I worked as a music critic for Time Out Paris during these years, and often my beat was world music. In fact, I think that made up more assignments than anything else. This tag world music, as I've mentioned, it means really a kind of collective term of music from the global south. And it finds more space in France and perhaps respect more than anywhere else. You can see the seriousness with which these, quote, other art forms are treated in some of the many collaborations between revered and popular French singers and world musicians. Even right now, for the last couple of years, France's most popular classical pianist, Alexandre Tarot, has been performing and recording with Angélique Kidjo. I'm not going to go into the reasons for this kind of embrace. The French have remained the top per capita consumers of music globally, and it's surely this appreciation of the form itself that has enlivened their curiosities. But it is also surely the colonial history of France and its lingering romanticized attachments to coloniality that also fueled this scene. Calypso Rose's entry into French popular culture as a world music artist was the brainchild of her now former manager, Jean-Michel Gibert, who in turn recruited another one of his clients, the much adored and much respected French-Spanish composer, producer, performer, Manu Chao. Chao first visited Rose in Trinidad during Carnival season in 2012, and 4 years of musical exchanges between them and other musicians and producers like the Toronto-based Cobo Town resulted in Rose's Far From Home album and its subsequent promotion in France. And during which time she received a great deal of media attention. She was featured on France's main television programs, like its breakfast shows, and has a lot of sort of nighttime talk shows. And she was on several of them. She played some of its largest venues, including at the Olympia in Paris, and her success there overflowed into other achievements, including in 2019 when she became the oldest performer to present a full set on the Coachella stage, which would have likely not happened without this sort of big moment in France. Now, because of the very limited time we have, I'm going to briefly introduce a few observations and questions about the popular reception of Rose in France over these years. First, it's important to place Rose in the historical context of Black artists coming from the Americas to France to pursue and find support for their practice. In From Harlem to Paris, Michel Fabre traces the migrations of dozens of Black American writers to the seemingly welcoming creative haven of France over the last century. Fabre's research tends to emphasize the favorable generative role France played. And so we might even view the embrace of Rose in France as in line with not just this kind of openness to world music, but also with the historical early embrace of jazz in France as the music of high culture, and similarly to its embrace of the blues and spirituals as important cultural production. Of course, France's promise as a site of liberation also simultaneously masks its deep institutional investments in anti-Blackness and its determined unwillingness to reckon with the truths of its continuing work as a colonizing power. Indeed, its historical embrace of Black artists and forms of Black Atlantic culture is simultaneously a kind of nationalist project which allows France to present itself as a more progressive, civilized space than North America, and also indulge a fetishistic exoticization of Blackness. In short, the embrace of Black cultures of the Americas in France is filled with ambivalence and contradictions. Eileen Julian notes that when Josephine Baker first arrived in France as a member of the dance troupe Revue Negre, France was in fact in the throes of negrophilia, an aesthetic manifested prominently in the visual arts, music, and performance. Negrophilia was a complex, ambiguous phenomenon, conflating European notions of African and African-American life and performance. Julian emphasizes the performances of Baker and others was greeted, this is ranging from the 1925-1927 period, that these performances were greeted in the French press with hysterical acclaim. Not only was Baker not a French colonial subject or citizen, but as a victim of American racism, she bolstered French claims to have created the Première Republic of Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. France's narrative of inclusion, very similar to the ways in which Canada has also indulged this practice, hid the sinister nature of its colorblind or race-free storyline in that its acceptance of Black Americans pointed away from its racist treatment of its own colonial subjects. And you know, recently I watched a new documentary about Oscar Peterson. It was really interesting to see the Canadian producers do this again in terms of presenting Canada as a producer of someone like Oscar Peterson, but invisibilizing Canada's very problematic history of anti-Black racism. For artists like Rose, therefore, navigation in this context is a challenging exercise. For instance, in her Victoire acceptance speech, she mentions that her great-grandmother is from French New Guinea and leaves it at that, leaving the audience to enact French nationalism in a moment, which is very recognizable, not in just the tone of the host translation, but the kind of happy, enthusiastic response of the audience to Rose's mention of this ancestry. Despite the fact that what Rose is really doing in that moment is calling attention to the French slave trade, which results in her great-grandmother being brought to Tobago from French Guinea. Rose persists in calling attention to this history, but in contexts in which she has more control of the narrative. There's a wonderful concert documentary in which Rose explains this history at length. But in the more popular formats like the morning talk shows and like the acceptance speech, the reference is similarly brief and makes the audience access to frame Calypso Soca as fun tropical music, rather than imbued with a critical consciousness that actually is conveyed by Rose herself and in her music. It's this discomfort that likely led to criticisms from some cultural critics about Rose's turn to, quote, world music. In perhaps the most considered review of Rose's album, which appeared in the media, the one by Nigel Thomas in The Guardian, under the very pointed title, Calypso Rose and the Cult of Nostalgia, it fairly criticizes Rose's Far From Home album as a throwback. Quote, the music on Rose's album harkens back to the early melodies. The music on Rose's album harkens back to the melodies of early Calypso, with covers of songs by Roaring Lion, Lady Irie, and Lord Pretender, and new songs reflect and integrate the zeitgeist of the fabled golden era of Calypso of the early to mid-20th century with the oral milieu of a modern era. Producer Ivan Duran recruits Drew Gonzalez, chief architect of Toronto-based proto-Calypso band Cobo Town, to shape the songs and sounds of this record. Fixed beats in the tempo and rhyming couplets in the lyrics make for pleasant listening. Singing along and dancing. The melodies and songs like Abatina, Calypso Queen, and Leave Me Alone spring from the simple re minor harmonies, evident in the Calypso style of the earliest recordings, and hang on Rose's septuagenarian voice, a mix of power and fragility. Later in the review, Thomas lays out some of the problems with this endeavor. He says, this review, by its nature, is from the perspective of the island native accustomed and knowledgeable of Calypso, of Calypso and Rose's place within the genre. In other words, he is pointing out, in fact, that therefore the other perspectives, the kind of enthusiastic embrace, are by people who do not really understand or know the genre. And he adds, an objective analysis of this album would also consider the merits that serve the function of any commercial recording, to sell copies more than to display the art of Calypso. The record label's aesthetic formula was directly shaped by the commercial imperatives of achieving airplay by developing crossover sound. One can't fault that, he says, but, and mirroring the challenge faced by the artist in connecting her artistry to colonial history, Thomas says, we hear in some of Rose's compositions like Zoom, 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 I Am African, and Waff Dance, the urge to break free and jam in that old soca way. But this is not soca. This is world music, exotic and hedonistic to the foreign air. The spirits of Ed Watson and Art Dakota are hemmed in sonically and emotionally. Authenticity, he says, gives way to commodity. As Thomas also points out, the challenge of acquiring success in the marketplace is not unique to Rose. World music, that label that bundles the other music into a category for sales and unique marketing, is both a godsend for and a mockery of Calypso. It is said that the world music genre has allowed artists to gain international record sales, tour income, boost their self-esteem and local economies, and often their very own culture in organized commercial international markets. The commercial streamlining of the music, which sanitizes its emotional dynamics to render it homogeneous and formulaic, is also noted. So therefore, Thomas views the music of Rose's Far From Home as a revival of the cult of nostalgia. Aging third world music stars, he says, are resurrected late in their careers, are scrubbed, repackaged, and discovered by a new audience. Now, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with Thomas's analysis, but I think it perhaps undermines the radical possibilities of Calypso Rose's music, even in its repackaging for a world music market. As I mentioned, Rose herself in the music and in interviews has been persistent in raising the specter of colonization. And I think the clarity of her pursuit of liberation in the music manages to push against the restrictive push of the market to invisibilize this history and this critical consciousness. I note for many Black musicians in France, the popularization of Rose was deeply moving, and Rose's success influenced the production of projects that are at once nostalgic and also imbued a Black, radical, and feminist politics. Haitian Canadian singer Melissa Laveau's LP, Radio So Well, which was released 2 years later in 2018, is a prime example of that, whereby the Haitian singer-songwriter revisits Haitian folk songs and brings to them feminist, in her case, or rather highlights and brings out of them feminist and in her case, queer sensibilities, a project that significantly advanced her own success in the French music market. So while Thomas's observations about world music's and market imperatives are not wrong, I think they undermine the radical potential in even this context. Additionally, while some have read Far From Home as, quote, not really Calypso, not really soca, I think the reinvention of her music through her various collaborations, and her most recent one is with the very highly regarded American musician Carlos Santana, ought to be better served not as a sanitization of her music, though that may be happening too, but as exemplary of the processes of creolization that produce new sounds and new forms of culture. Indeed, the dogged reification of the form of Calypso music over the last 2 decades has no doubt contributed to the lackluster production of the form and its failure to regain the kind of influence and audience it once had. I think one thing we don't seem to recognize enough is the persistence of resistance in any exercise of power. That despite whatever imperatives are placed upon artists and audiences, they and we find spaces and means through which to reinterpret, restage, and sometimes rewire the intended relations of power. Lyndon Gill's work on the potential radical queerness of Rose's music also offers a more complex reading of her work in this regard. In closing, I'll briefly turn to the question and politic that forms the focus of my own research, which is on the constitution of animality. I've been thinking a lot about how the film about Rose that gained new audiences following her increased global visibility subsequent to her success in France. The subtitle of that film is The Lioness of the Jungle. A strange choice by the filmmakers, given that it's not a name for which Rose has ever been known historically, but just a moniker given to her by two white South Africans sitting in her audience at one concert. The choice of that title conjures all the dreadful and deeply problematic histories of racialized animalization that have been exercised upon Black bodies since at least the colonial encounter. The name places Rose in the jungle because she is Black, let's be clear. Have you ever heard of Mick Jagger being called King of the Jungle? But what Rose has done with the phrase is to claim it, to answer back to the racialized animalization that this title might imply in a way that undermines its intended violence. Like many before her, who have been tagged animal because they failed to fit a particular performance of respectable civility, her claiming the tag is a reply to the accusation of animality. It's as if she answers, I am a lioness, so what? I am an animal, so what? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andel. That was a very enjoyable paper, very provocative. And I would like now to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Hope Monroe. Dr. Hope Monroe is an associate professor of music at California State University, Chico, where she teaches courses in world music and music history. She earned her PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Texas at Austin. Her book, What She Go Do, Women in Afro-Trinidadian Music, was released in 2016 as part of the Caribbean Studies series of the University Press of Mississippi. The title of her presentation is Calypso Rose on the Bandstand, Changing Musical Textures.
Okay, the title of my presentation is Calypso Rose on the Bandstand, Changing Musical Textures. And I want to thank everybody for inviting me to come and present this. The purpose of this presentation is to provide analyses of several of Calypso Rose's recordings from different time periods in her career. I will be pointing out how musical textures have changed and shifted based on the contributions of various arrangers and producers. More than any other Calypsonian, Calypso Rose has always been eager to try new sounds to enhance the message of her song lyrics. And that is what I hope to demonstrate during this presentation. So what is musical texture? This term refers to the performing forces present in a musical composition or arrangement or recording and the way they interact with each other. Rose has worked with a number of different arrangers. Today, we'll be looking at her work with Ed Watson, Pelham Goddard, Eddie Grant, and Manu Chao. Calypso Rose has an interesting creative process. It's not unlike other people's processes. She typically makes demo recordings on cassette. I think she still likes to use cassette. Some of us still like to use cassette. And accompanying herself on guitar, she will make these demos herself, and then she will give them to her arranger, who will write the arrangements that the band is going to play on the recordings and in the Calypso tent. So that's how she does it. She's done that since probably the 70s. So the first song we're going to hear is a song called Palette, which comes from Calypso Rose, Calypso Queen of the World. And the arrangements were done by Ed Watson and performed by Ed Watson and Orchestra. This is a typical Calypso orchestra that you would have heard in the 60s and still here today, actually. There are brass instruments such as saxophones and trumpets and trombones, a rhythm section of keyboard, guitar, bass, and drums. And in this song, Rose, I like to think of it as songs like The Peanut Vendor or El Manicero, which is a peanut vendor selling their wares. So Calypso Rose is tapping into a long tradition of songs like this, in which she is taking on the persona of something very familiar to people in Latin America, the Caribbean, and of course, North American neighborhoods like in Queens and so forth. So you're going to hear this really interesting horn arrangement, which imitates the rhythms of Calypso Rose's speech. So we are going to hear Palette right now.
It's palette selling to make a shilling. It's palette selling for me living. That is my occupation, to be a palette woman. Set out to hand about the stuff. I selling me palette from 10 cents up. If you hear me, palette, palette, mama. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. I go in all about east, west, north and south. All by the college, I have my privilege. I have all kind of flavor, orange pine, so what's up and vanilla. I'm pushing me cat or through the rain, coming down and singing the same refrain. If you hear me, palette, palette, mama. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. Ouais! La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. From Sunday to Monday and public holiday, I selling me palette, me ain't had no limit. Anytime that you're thirsty, you could suck a palette from Rosie. I don't care if me business bust, I selling palette and I give it trust. If you hear me, palette, palette, mama. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama.
Okay, so that is just a really fun experiment with using her voice. Pa la 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 la. It's so much like other songs of the generation. So the next composition I want to look at is tempo, or give me tempo, or give me more tempo. People write the title in different ways. All right, so this is her big winning road march, where she won the road march title in 1977. And in this particular recording, well, let me read a quote from her that she gave to Dr. Ray Allen for his book on Manhattan and Brooklyn's contributions to Carnival. She says, I was going to school studying criminology in Manhattan and living in Queens. So I would ride the F train every morning, and the sound of the train wheel going daka 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 every morning gave me the idea for the rhythm of the song, Give Me Tempo. So when I was in class and a line would come in my head, I would ask to go to the ladies' room, and I would go and be dancing and writing the song in my head. So I wrote that song studying criminology, but I never thought it would win the Road March. Now, the story behind the sessions here is that the record producer, Ralston Charles of Charlie's Records, hired Art Decoto, but he was not happy with the arrangements that Art Decoto made. So he took on Pelham Goddard, who was just starting his career at that time period. And so what happened is that Goddard arranged and recorded the rhythm section and horn parts in Trinidad, then sent them to Brooklyn and had Calypso Rose do her final vocal tracks in that recording studio that Charlie's Records managed. So in this particular song, or recording, I should say, the musical texture is somewhat thinner than the Ed Watson arrangement. Mostly what we hear are keyboards, synthesizers of that era. So the horn lines aren't being played by live horns, they're being played by Pelham Goddard on the synthesizer. But you hear a very, very active bass, which is a very key instrument. Bass guitar is really a key instrument in Calypso at this point, also very prominent in soca music. And many other styles of dance music, including disco and funk and so forth. So what you're going to hear is this very boom, 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 boom bass part that really drives the arrangement. So here is Give Me More Tempo. I hate to stop it there, but I know there's lots of other musical things that I want to talk about, and also other that Rhoma after me is going to talk about. So I'm going to stop there, but that's hopefully a well-known song by people who are fans of Calypso Rose. So we're moving along now to 1993. And this record is the first record that Calypso Rose did with Eddie Grant for his label Ice Records. And Eddie Grant is kind of unique amongst Caribbean artists in that he was able to carve out a self-sufficient role for himself for quite a long time, and from a very early time. He opened his own recording studio and record label situated in Barbados. I think he actually also owns a pressing plant, so he can actually do all of the production from the demos all the way to the final product. Calypso Rose went down to Barbados to record this in 92, and it was released in 93. And here we're hearing a lot of different instruments, which amazingly, most of them are played by Eddie Grant himself, who also wrote the arrangements, and uses this doo-doo bass part that I've read about in works by Michael Lochu Tong and other people who've written about calypso rhythms. And it's really a dun, 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 which in Trinidad is called a doo-doo pattern, but it's also called a tresillo in many types of music from Latin America. So this is a sound that, while staying in the calypso tradition, is also incorporating ideas from other parts of the Caribbean and Latin America. So we are going to listen to that now. Fade down to allow room for other presenters to play their music, and so we don't run over time. So that was really rhythmically exciting. I remember playing that when it first came out on my radio show, and really enjoying it quite a lot. So we're moving now to sessions that Calypso Rose did around 2015. This is from her album that was released in 2017 called Far From Home. And this was recorded in Belize. And the story behind this session is that her Calypso Rose's manager, Even Durant, wanted to have her do some covers of older calypsos like No Madame and Rum and Coca-Cola. And she said she went down there, and this is from an interview that she gave. I wasn't feeling the vibes on some of the songs. The key was too low for me. It was the first time I had to sing the lyrics in front of me, because some of the songs, I'd heard the melody, but some of the songs had been written since before I was born. And I couldn't feel the vibes at all. One day when we were taking a rest, I picked up the guitar and I went to the back room with a pen and my pad, and I wrote, "Leave Me Alone." And when I came out, I said, "Guys, listen to this and see if you like it." When they heard "Leave Me Alone," oh my God, everybody started jumping. They said, "Let's record it one time, or right now, let's go." So this arrangement kind of harkens back to the kind of performing forces that Ed Watson's orchestra utilized. There's instruments such as the quattro, which is mixed rather high. This recording session continued for a while. The original recordings occurred in Belize, and then the recordings were played for Manu Chao, who had been invited to come to Trinidad in Carnival 2015. He listened to the songs and convinced Calypso Rose and her management to allow him to remix and also add some tracks. So you also hear Manu Chao playing charanga and guitar on this recording and doing background vocals. And also on this particular song, Manu Chao is also providing backing and lead vocals. So again, you're going to hear that, really punchy bass line, but also a number of different musical ideas from different Caribbean traditions. And then, of course, Manu Chao's own heritage of Spain and France and his experience in Latin America as well.
Crazy, let go me hand, let me jump up in the band. I don't want nobody to come and stop me. Leave me, let me free up. Myself, let me jump up. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. So leave me alone. in me body. With me friends I am happy. So leave me alone. I am going home. So leave me alone. I am going home.
Okay, so the last song I'm going to talk about is a collaboration that Calypso Rose did with Angelique Kidjo. And if you're not familiar with her, Angelique Kidjo is one of the top global music artists of today. Her impact on African music is analogous to Miriam Makeba and Huma Sakela and Ladysmith Black Mambazo. She's just like at the top of the field, and she's won multiple Grammy Awards, including last year for her album Mother Nature. The track that they did together, Wafa Dance, and I'm actually going to play the music video because it's really, really charming. What her manager decided to do was put it on Far From Home and also So Calypso, which is a record that Calypso Rose released in 2018. So what we're hearing in terms of rhythm here, rhythm and musical texture, is what I would call Afrobeat or Pan-African diaspora type of work. Rose sings in English, and then Angelique Kidjo sings in Fon, which is one of the several languages that she speaks. So let's go ahead and watch the video for Wafa Dance.
Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose. I will not want to sit and chat. I will not want no tit for tat. I will just want for dance. I will just want for dance. Anywhere you want, but no matter. Anywhere you want, me to wale. Africa wanna dance. Oh yeah. Africa wanna dance. Now we come from Tobago. Maybe just a babolo. Now we just want to let go. Oh me boy.
So that's just a wonderful song and such a wonderful collaboration between two great women who share their vision with the entire world. So in conclusion, over her long career, Calypso Rose has had the opportunity to collaborate with a wide variety of singers, writers, and producers from throughout the African diaspora. Famous for her well-crafted lyrics, her work is enhanced by the exciting musical arrangements created by her collaborators over the years. Part of the excitement and energy of Rose's recordings comes from the changing musical textures and the musical strands that are woven together to create them. This, I feel, is one of the many reasons that Calypso Rose's songs have achieved widespread recognition and continue to make a lasting impact upon global music.
Thanks, Hope. That was wonderful. Thank you very, very much. And it gives us a lot to chew on. And I would like now to introduce Rhoma Spencer. And she is our final presenter today. And Rhoma Spencer is, of course, the person who convened this symposium as well, and is working on a full-length musical work on Calypso Rose. So Rhoma Spencer is a Trinidadian Canadian queer actor, director, playwright, comedian, and docu-filmmaker. A graduate of York University with an MFA in directing, she formed Theatre Archipelago in 2005. And under her artistic direction, the company produced Mad Miss, Just Jazz in 2005, Fallen Angel and the Devil Concubine in 2006, Twilight Cafe 2007, I, Marcus Garvey 2009, and Obia Opera 2012. She's the recipient of a U.S. House of Congress proclamation and the Borough President of New York City proclamation for her contribution to Caribbean theater. Most recently, Spencer wrote and directed the highly successful physical theater and digital performance Quarantine. As 2022-23 artist in residence at the Queer Trans and Research Lab, Spencer will write a jukebox musical based on the life of queer Caribbean icon and the undisputed Calypso Queen of the World, Calypso Rose. Calypso Rose, MacArthur, Linda, Monica, Sandy Lewis. Her residency will culminate in a staged reading of the musical with a cast of Canadian actors and a guest actor from Trinidad and Tobago to play the role of the young Calypso Rose. Let's welcome Rhoma Spencer with the presentation, The Politics of Calypso Rose, Shape-Shifting and Disrupting the Normative.
Calypso Rose, Linda, MacArthur, Monica, Sandy Lewis, was born in the village of Bethel, Tobago, and was raised in Trinidad by her uncle and his common-law wife, fondly called by Calypso Rose as Auntie, her adopted mother. The move from Tobago as a 9-year-old with a grave speech impediment to Trinidad must have been a culture shock for the young Carty, as she was called at home. Free from the enclave of her spiritual Baptist Reverend father, Carty will now encounter Calypso through her aunt's love of the music. Perhaps it is here we see her first move to shape-shift and disrupt a normative. Her politics was evident when by the age of 13, she wrote her first Calypso, Glass Thief. This paper attempts to identify Calypso Rose's selections over the years that are at the intersection of change in societal habits and behaviors. The Politics of Calypso Rose, Shape-Shifting and Disrupting the Normative, will dissect the calypsos that presents itself as social commentaries and change makers. It wants to unravel the duality in Rose's compositions that puts a lid on any assumptions of her same-sex desire, how she positions herself as an any average heteronormative Caribbean woman in contention with their male partners, putting any suspicion at bay around her own sexual orientation. One which she says in a 2007 interview with author Lyndon K. Gill, "I never had a man in my life. And because of that, Calypsonians would taunt me by saying she's a lesbian, only because I never slept with any of them. Thank the Lord for that. So I made it final. This year will make it 11 years I've been married. September will make it 11. We were married in a church in California, a Catholic church. My family accepts me. My whole family knew. My aunt had known, that same aunt, the lady who raised me, adopted me. Everybody accepts me, and who can't accept me, chew them. People in Trinidad and Tobago do talk about me, but I don't care. They may talk, but not in a negative way. Not in a negative way at all. If they're saying negative, it's probably on their mind. But they still hug me. They still kiss me. They still bow to me. Oh yes. Every time I arrive at home, Trinidad and Tobago, they bow to me, man. Unquote. Growing up in the village of Bethel, Carty never encountered larceny. And so it was an effrontery to the young girl to witness a man attack a woman in the market and steal her glasses from off her face. She immediately returned to her aunt's home to relate the vulgarity of this offense. And in order to contain her horror, Carty took to pen and paper to advise her Tobagonian boys to literally stay on their island and not come to Trinidad, lest you become a glasses thief. Glass Thief is her first ever calypso, written in 1955 and sung for the nation's first chief minister, Dr. Eric Williams, in 1956. As the chorus opines, "Well, Tobagonian boys, stay in your island and wear your foils. Jane went into the market to get a piece of ice, and a fella grabbed the glasses from off she eyes." Rose is making a bid here to define the socialization of the Tobagonian body against their Trinidadian counterpart. While it is one country, there is a distinct dichotomy between the two streams of consciousness between a Tobagonian and a Trinidadian. The young Carty was able to identify this sufficiently enough to compose a Glass Thief Calypso. In this Caribbean Insights TV program, she recalls her shock of the incident.
The incident that I saw was amazing to me because coming from a small island and a small village, I have never seen such a thing in my life. I've never seen someone stealing, less more, stealing a pair of glasses from somebody's eyes and start running. So I went home and I started writing the calypso called Glass Thief. And that was the turn of my life.
Glass Thief is not just the retelling of a market scandal, but it offers an insight into understanding the inherent makeup of the Tobagonian, who in 1955 was seen to some as backward and less progressive than the Trinidadian. Carty was evidently brilliant enough to recognize that there was something potent and honorable about the Tobago boy who would never indulge in such practice as attacking someone and stealing the glasses off their eyes. Rather than have her Tobagonian boys experience what she witnessed, Carty is resolved to warn the Tobagonian to stay in Tobago and not be corrupted by the Trinidadian boys' habits. Here we see the early attempts of Calypso Rose's political ideology in song. However, The biggest impact Calypso Rose has made to affect change in the Caribbean and Latin America came when she sang the calypso, No Madame. This calypso outlined the plight of domestic servants and the abuse they were subjected to from their household employers while being underpaid.
Looking at that domestic, quite in Princess Town, but in Madam Chihane sick, the way how she's getting on. As I reach in the morning, all day me name calling. She's too miserable. Everything she want me to do is road. You wash up the wells, no matter. You clean down the stairs, no matter. You entertain the guests, no matter. You clean up the mess, no madam, no madam. No madam, no madam, no madam, no madam, no madam, no madam, no madam. When I speak into the madam, you have to believe me. I have to be at attention. Like if I'm in the army, I have to watch that and iron for the children and the husband. I working like an elephant for only $20 a month is road. You clean the kitchen, no matter. You empty the dustbin, no matter. You mop up the floor, no matter. You empty the pool, no madam, no madam.
No Madame effected a change in the Trinidad and Tobago labor laws to include domestic workers. This evolution, no doubt, may have influenced the International Labour Organization's policies to formalize paid domestic work in Latin America and in the Caribbean. Calypso Rose has the ability to make us dance and at the same time move us into thinking about our own collective social rights and justice as we navigate the ethos of Carnival with its plethora of music to jump and wave. Her activism in song continues as she tackles sexism and gender equality. In her seminal calypso, Trouble, with its hook line, Fence Her In, is feminist theory 101 that Gloria Stein could have never said any better. Fence her in. It go be trouble if you fence her in.
Many men make a big mistake when they treat the girlfriend mean. Some of them have a jealous mind and they want to fence them in. Don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. I tell you, don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. Never, never do that. I met a man the other day. He treat me like a queen. Even then, I had to warn him. Please don't fence me in. Don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. Don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. You don't want to lose. Don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. You want to lose. Don't you fence her in. You gonna be trouble if you fence her in. I tell you.
Rose takes on the role as a de facto proselytizer when she implores the men not to fence their woman in because it would be trouble. A trouble which she has not revealed to us even when she puts herself in the role of the woman in a new relationship. And I quote, I met a man the other day. He treated me like a queen. Even then, I had to warn him, please, don't fence me in, unquote. However, as the song develops, we hear a counter voice saying, you're going to lose her. I do believe that this is the ultimate trouble the Calypso harps towards, that Caribbean man-woman relationships will disintegrate into trouble when a woman feeling fenced in escapes her abusive environment. Is this trouble for him or trouble for her? This Calypso hangs on a balance that offers the listener the choice of choosing whose trouble it is when a woman is feeling fenced in a relationship. On the other hand, there is Solomon, whose wife gathers the courage to put him out of the house on account of his physical, emotional, and financial abuse. Even then, this wife, in all the shortcomings she will endure with his exodus, has gathered the strength to make it on her own without Solomon and save her sanity and their children's upbringing. Get out my house. Let me put some light in my life, Solomon.
When you get paid, I cannot see a cent. I have to borrow just to pay the rent. You're never home in the time of need. You on the street trying to plant your seed. The children don't know their own daddy. In the day and night who they see is me. You're walking out of the front daybreak. Solomon, how much could a woman take? So get up in house. Solomon, you're a stinking lump. Solomon, you are a blight. Solomon, get up in life and me put some light in my life. Solomon.
Perhaps one of Rose's calypsos that turns the lens on a marriage of convenience to regularize one's immigration status in the United States is the calypso, The Other Woman. While at first glance, one may say this composition has more to do with an extramarital relationship, to me, its subtext is about acquiring your US green card. In this composition, Rose prefaces her argument by saying that, and I quote, "When you came from Grenada, you were crazy. But once you land in the United States, you become stupid," unquote. She reminded him how happily they lived back in their home country. And now he has married an American woman. She has now become the other woman. He still comes to her house looking for love. She does his cooking, washes his clothes, while his wife stays at home playing queen. Calypso Rose, through this composition, brings us to the intersection of those undocumented Caribbean nationals and other immigrants whose labor helped to build the United States economy from time immemorial. However, Rose's oeuvre cannot go unnoticed without the coup d'etat of the Calypso Monarch competition in 1978, disrupting a normative that has been more than 6 decades long. There is a school of thought that insists Calypso Rose was cheated of this crown in 1977 because a woman cannot win a king competition. This bastion of Calypso royalty began in 1939, with its first winner being the Growling Tiger. But this competition traces back to 1911, when a competition was organized to choose the most original song on a local topic for the Trinidad Carnival that year. One cannot dismiss that Rose's upward Calypso mobility from winning the Road March in 1977 with Tempo to her 1978 Carnival season popularity with her Majesty made the renaming of the Calypso King competition to Calypso Monarch competition in 1976 even more valid. However, it is important to note that Singing Francine was in the Calypso King finals in 1972, 73, and 75, coming second to Kitchener in 1975. According to Calypso researcher and author Rudolph Otley, and I quote, "Singing Francine had more appearances in the King competition than Calypso Rose, and she has been more impactful in the renaming of the Calypso King competition to the Calypso Monarch competition," unquote. Though this may be so, by 1976, when the competition name was changed to the Calypso Monarch, there were no women in the finals of that year. Yet, it was the opportune time to do so because there were now more women making it into the Calypso semifinals, and thus breaking down the gender disparity that existed before. It cannot be refuted that it was also the occasion when Trinidad and Tobago became a republic in 1976. And one may argue that the nation was ready to shed all references to the British monarchy. By 1977, there were 3 women in the new Calypso Monarch Finals competition, namely singing Francine, Calypso Rose, and Buzzin' Bee. Calypso Rose's stardom was rising, and in 1978, she took the title of Calypso Monarch, putting an end to the monopoly of men wearing the Calypso crown with her 2 selections, Her Majesty and I Thank Thee. It is ironic that Rose still held steadfast to a royalty narrative that year, despite Trinidad and Tobago's Republican status, with her composition, Her Majesty, Queen of the Road. Shape-shifting her way into the annals of carnival history, Calypso Rose makes no excuse in amplifying her influence and contributions to the creation of carnivals in Barbados, Jamaica, and Belize. Like most Calypsonians post-Trinidad Carnival, invitations will come from promoters up the Caribbean archipelago to perform in their territories. Barbados, being one of these islands, saw Calypso Rose performing at the annual May Day celebrations in Barbados. The popularity of her performances there had crowd capacity increasing every year, prompting Barbados tourism authorities to create Crop Over Carnival. In this music TT business of Calypso workshop, Rose stakes a claim of her influence over this and many other carnivals.
I used to be selected to perform in Barbados for their holiday called May Day. And for the past 3 years, and every year, the crowd has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I wrote, it was the 1st of May, they call it May Day. Barbados was on fire, I say. Mama, so much fat, I could not regret the celebration on the tourist island. Two Barbados combo, playing my sweet calypso. Barbados jumping, buoy, Barbados rolling, buoy. Bajan jump sky high, when the rhythm start to back, and you could hear them old brass, community brass, midi mass. And so the next year, Carnival was introduced in Barbados. And then when I wrote the song, Juju Warrior, and at the last verse, I said, I'm shooting my arrow straight over to Jamaica. Mr. Byron Lee called me when he came to Trinidad that carnival time. And he spoke to me. I said, Byron, why don't you introduce carnival in Jamaica? He said, Sister Rose, you think so? I said, yes. Yes, Mr. Byron Lee, bring carnival in Jamaica. I wrote, jamming in Jamaica was carnival in J.A. When the party girls came out to play, was bacchanal every day. I say carnival in J.A. and the ball in jamming in Jamaica until they make hats, caps, t-shirt, everything with jamming in Jamaica. It's so Jamaica started carnival through Calypso Rose. And then 1977, when I won the road march, they took me down to Belize. And for 4 years, the crowd is getting bigger and bigger behind the truck I am on.
I said, nah, this have to be like Carnival, man. And then I wrote. But before I wrote Fire in Belize, I wrote Louis Punta. I love the way how you punta. Oh my gosh. They took me to a place they called Dandriga, that when the slaves were being expelled out of St. Vincent, they took the culture, the banana fig, the tree, and end up in South and Central America. And Belize at that time was a British colonial territory in Belize. And I wrote Louis Punta. It was all over Europe, big as ever. No, I say, well, Belize have to have their carnival now. Mommy, oh, why you tell me that I shouldn't play mass? I only want to have my costume in the band. So all my friends and them waiting for me to jump. For Memorial Park will be jumping to the beat. I want to jump with Lord Rayburn on Albert Street. Man, if you hear me, zoom, 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 me foot upon me era up me. Man, if you hear me, zoom, 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 I'm going crazy. Me back upon me. See, mommy, mommy, I begging you, please. I want to set fire in Belize. Now, the 10th of September is the biggest day in Belize right now. It's Carnival in Belize on the 10th of September. True Calypso Rose.
So in closing, Calypso Rose, now in her 82nd year, continues to make music, and her revival in the last 10 years saw her winning a French Grammy, the Victoire de la Musique Award, for her album Far From Home in 2017. Her music has evolved over the years, where one can identify even ska and reggae in some of her compositions, with gospel music albums thrown into the milieu as well. Even at her age today, she continues to blaze a trail for herself with her participation at Coachella in 2019, making her the oldest musician to ever grace this stage. Her collaborations with Angelique Kidjo, Nyla Blackman, Marshall Montano, Manu Chao, and Canada's celebrated calypso and world music artist Drew Gonzalez is a testament of her ability to shapeshift and disrupt the normative. Thank you.
Been too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting the long, long reign, they make it try to take down the name. I've been breaking down walls ever since I was small. They could stand up tall and strong like a wrecking ball. I go knock them down. Oh yeah! They say that I've been too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting the long, long reign, they make it try to take down the name. Everywhere I wear supreme, the one and only Calypso queen. No man alive or dead could come and take the crown of my head. Oh yeah! Tell them, baby! Tell them, baby! Tell them for me! Those foolish and petty men, I don't worry about them. They could try to take me down, but to the end I retain my crown. They say that I've been too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting me long, long reign, they make it try to take down my name. Oh yeah! They used to call me small island girl. Now I travel the world. Everywhere I go, they know I am Calypso Rose, queen of Calypso. Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose. I am Calypso Rose, Calypso Rose. Oh yeah. The sax is blowing now. The sax blowing by my feet. And the guitar coming, jamba coming up. Ooh. Oh yeah. The sax still blowing. Africa, now come in with guitar. Jamba! Woo! Jamba! I am the daughter of warrior, no time to rest or retire. Others have come and gone, but Calypso Rose is still singing on. They say that I've been too long, forgetting that the Constitution is strong. Instead of respecting the long, long reign, they taking time to take the meaning. Oh yeah! Tell them, baby, Tobago girl they are so. Oh yeah!
Thank you. Thank you, Calypso Rose. And thank you, Rhoma, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you to all the participants. I thought it was a Calypso feast, a real Caribbean feast of provocative papers. You four have led us through the twists and turns of Rose's oeuvre, with all its majestic flourishes and complicated turns and turnarounds as well, and have held us spellbound for a couple of hours. We now have some time for a couple of, well, more than a couple, for a Q&A and questions that the audience might have. But before we move to that part of the program, here is a quick recap of the four presentations. Alison McCletchy brought us smack into the middle of Rose's Wajang feminist aesthetic, looking at the complexity of Caribbean womanhood, and especially the trajectory of the female performer in a traditional male space. Next, we listened to Andel Gosain's extensive view of Rose in France, looking at the links between the reception there and the long history of Black performers being embraced in France. Complex and interesting, and focusing too on her Guinea great-grandmother and her being awarded a French Grammy. Hope Monroe followed Andel with Calypso Rose on the bandstand. An analysis of selected recordings from Rose's work, looking at the changes in musical theater, musical textures according to the input of different arrangers and producers. Hope contends that more than any other Calypsonian, Rose has been enthusiastic about integrating sound innovation into her calypsos. And Rhoma Spencer, the last presenter, identifies selected calypsos that are positioned at the intersections of change in societal habits and behaviors. In analyzing Rose's calypsos that present themselves as social commentaries and change makers, Rhoma pinpoints the duality in these compositions. Here, Rose positions herself as any average heteronormative Caribbean woman in contention with their thorns, that is, their male partners, removing any lurking questions about Rose's own sexual orientation. Here we have a dissection of Rose's strategic presentation of herself and how that has changed over the years. So in a nutshell, that's what we heard. And now the floor is open for questions.
To help facilitate this, Christopher Smith and myself will read questions, and guests who have their hands raised, I will allow you to talk. So Richard Fung, I will turn your mic on now and you can ask your question.
Go ahead, Richard. Richard Fung.
If you're speaking, Richard, your mic is still muted. You should be able to unmute it on your end now, though.
So Richard says, I didn't have a question yet. I only pressed to see what was there. So that would clarify that. To get the conversation generated, I will take the opportunity to pose my own question because part of this conversation has been not centering, but highlighting when Calypso Rose disclosed, and I'm hearing different 1977 or possibly later on, whatnot. And I'm curious from all the panelists what we make of that regardless, because as Ramabai was saying in her closing comments, so what? Like, what does it matter? And so I'm curious, I guess, as a way to kind of, as we wait for more questions to come in through the Q&A.
Okay, let's, who would like to respond?
Yeah, well, I can't quite even respond because his audio keep in and out. So I didn't hear quite well what is the query, what is it he's requesting or asking of us to respond to, because it was breaking up on my end. But if somebody else heard it clearly, surely they can respond.
I think it was asking about the Chris, did I hear right? You're asking about the discrepancies about when or whether Rose identified herself as queer? Because
yes.
the breakup.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. And I think for me, I think Rhoma did a great job of, I mean, I just want to say, first of all, I really love the papers, Allison. I just thought the Bwajang feminism framing was a really wonderful way to get into Rose and to think about respectability politics. And Rhoma, it was just such a thorough consideration. And the question you asked, Chris, I think it's exactly the fluidity and flexibility and the, you know, I mean, I took my date from what was Rose saying, announcing that she'd been in a relationship for 18 years in this short YouTube clip with someone from Caribbean Equality in Queens. And, you know, that was a very celebratory moment in that clip. But I think the larger point is, and, you know, Ramabai also alluded to this, is that Rose was deliberate in presenting herself and working with the kind of constraining narratives of gender and sexuality that confronted her. You know, the kind of characterization of women as lesbian always happens, not just, you know, because Calypso Rose was a strong woman in the Calypso tent, but it's happened to feminists all the time. Like, that's usually been a principal way to undermine them. So I think we have to think of a response as projecting heterosexuality, not as necessarily claiming a heterosexual identity, but rather in responding to the kind of nonsense of the kind of patriarchy's reduction, you know, characterization of any woman challenging patriarchy as must be lesbian, because that has happened to, you know, feminists worldwide. And I think we can look to Rose's examples, as Rhoma pointed out, as kind of, you know, you ask the so what question. I mean, and you know, it's sort of where I end up too as well. What I see is a woman who has been exercising her agency to navigate different constraints of power.
I just wanted to jump on that, and thanks for that wonderful compliment, Anna. So I think one of the things that we have to kind of recognize, right, is that in the Caribbean, we do have all these kind of constraints and these ideas about what a woman should and should not be, right, or how a woman should and should not be. But I think when we look at someone like Rose and lots of other women, you're 100% correct, right? just going about the daily life of being a woman, right? Not even necessarily considering yourself a feminist, but just being a woman. Very often, if you do not conform to what someone else thinks, right? You're a lesbian, or you didn't get a good bamboo last night. I mean, you know, I went to Convened. That was always a talk about the nuns, right? The nun is being whatever because, you know, she don't get none. The nun don't get none. And, you know, in my own experience in South Carolina, the first time I cut my hair, right, and stopped putting chemicals in it, suddenly people were whispering and asking whether or not I was in fact a lesbian, because they didn't, I didn't walk around with my partner as an attachment on my arm, right? And so, you know, one of the things that I think about when I think about Rose and many of these women who I would consider role models is that they were so busy and are so busy just being, just doing, right? Just doing, that I think for me, that in itself is empowering, because they serve as an examples for multiple ways to be women. So that was my 2 cents.
Thank you, Alison. Rhoma, would you like to jump in on?
Yes, and I'd like to quote, you know, while it is said that there's a YouTube link that that is out there, that where she, you know, virtually for the first time the world hear that she says that she's a lesbian or came out. It is important to know that Rose herself comes from a generation that would never even use the word lesbian. All right, and I want to just quote something that that comes from a book by called Erotic Islands, Art and Activism in Queer Caribbean by Lyndon B. Gill. In one of his interviews with her, she said, and I quote, "I am a," how you call the word? How you call the word? "I have a friend or a lover." And she always says, quote, "your work, because this is what you love. Your work comes first," unquote. "But I still divide my time between my work and my lover, and we are domestic partners. This year will make it 11 years I've been married." You know, so, you know, she don't have to read and spell anymore for you. She puts it out there. It's just that, you know, the word, as I said, she comes from a generation that would not identify or call herself or say that I am a lesbian. Yeah.
Thank you, Rhoma. There is a question in the chat. I'm not clear what you said, Elliot. Are you reading it out, or who is reading it? Or can, yeah.
Ramabai, if you would like to, if it's easily accessible for you, then please feel free.
Okay, so there's the question is, I mean, is the audience seeing it? I'm not sure. Are they seeing the question?
I'm going to hit answer live, and then it should be moved to the panel that the audience can see.
Okay. So this is a question about, my question is in reference to the lack of women in TNT, corporate, civic, and political spheres mentioned by Alison, and evidence of stalled, if not reversing outcomes for gender equality. Okay, so it's been moved. I think, though, that's the gist of the question. So, Alison, can you respond? The question has disappeared.
Okay, I'm not quite sure. Shirley, can you unmute and maybe just be clearer?
The question itself in its entirety is in the answered panel, which attendees can see. It's just in the middle panel there, Ramabai.
Yeah, she said, Shirley, can you unmute?
I don't see it anymore.
Well, yep, I will allow Shirley to talk.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. Thank you. I do want to thank everyone for the lovely, enlightening, and enjoyable presentation. For me, this is an introduction to Calypso Rose and the scholarship on it. Yeah, so my question is in reference to the lack of women in Trinidad Tobago corporate, civic, and political spheres mentioned by Alison, and evidence of stalled, if not reversing, outcomes for gender equality. Rhona said something about the resistance to terminology from that comes from colonial monarchy. So I was wondering if any of the presenters could say more about this discourse. Is it sort of inherently gendered, and in what ways, in a bad way? And in what ways is Calypso Rose resignifying that discourse? Because I teach at an HBCU, and I do notice the moniker queen is often used by my students as, I think, playing with it as a term of empowerment, but I also wonder about how the discourse itself impedes that empowerment because of the gender assumptions. So yeah, is there ways Calypso Rose re-signifies that discourse or that term in particular?
So Shirley, I'll answer the first part and then maybe Rhoma can take up some of the others. So what I did in my dissertation research is I was trying to figure out, where are these women who've been educated in Trinidad for more than 185 years, right? Where are them? Where are they? Because we have this long history of educating women, unlike other places, right? Where a lot of the times girls were shut out of formal education. And so what I found is they're not in those powerful places, right? They're still in kind of like many of the service kind of professions, teaching, nursing, those kind of things, right? And so I find that kind of troubling. But when I thought about it, and I think this is what I'm trying to unpack here with this idea of Wajang feminism, is that in the Caribbean, we have to move beyond just, oh, we now have a female prime minister, or we now have a female whatever, right? And think about how women have always made a space for themselves, right? In a society where, let's face it, women came to this part of the world, Asian women and African women, as workers, as property, as somebody's property, right? And so how do these women, knowing how society kind of confines them, are able to find those spaces and find their voices and shape the society, right? So if we think about the Trinidad independence movement and the political party, sometimes we talk about the fat ass brigade, right? Which, is often used to describe a certain group of women who supported a particular political party. But these women help shape policy, right? And demand certain things from that political party. So that's what I'm trying to unpack with that, right? And that's what I'm saying. We can't use a North American model in the Caribbean. It's not going to make sense. So Rhoma, over to you.
Yeah, well, I am not sure what I have to respond to, but I will just anchor on this notion of queen. As you said, rightly said, that, some of your own students start using, and this notion of seeing ourselves, especially Black women, as queens. I think it is a historical and cultural response, in that we are looking back to Africa, which was once, as you very well know, led by kings and queens, and that the notion of kings and queens is not just a European construct, that you have the Queen of England and the Queen of Spain, or the King of Holland, and that sort of, it's not just a European construct, but it is our way of embracing and reconnecting to our own African consciousness when we were all kings and queens. And when we take on that nowadays, we are taking on the fact that, you know, putting an end to the fact that we are not just once descended from enslaved bodies, but descended from, you know, people as Queen Nzinga, Santewa, all these women who fought colonization in Africa. So I hope I respond to you know, a little of what it is you're querying, but this is my take on it in terms of the notion of embracing the word queen and our fixation with queendom. You know, in our carnival, we have the king and queen of carnival, our costumes. You know, one of the big things that everybody, you know, in the carnival, my post-emancipated African ancestors, they all, you know, were concerned with playing, you know, kings and queens. It's the 1 day or the 2 days that they have the ability to be somebody and play, you know, that they are not able to do for the rest of the year when Ash Wednesday comes around. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rhoma.
You're
Well,
welcome.
we have another question from Joy Mahabir. Can you unmute, please?
I think I am unmuted. I'm not sure if you all can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I really enjoyed the papers. They were so wonderful. And I like the idea of women making a space for themselves. And I'm also thinking about generational shifts in Calypso. So I'm thinking about the 1870s in Trinidad, when you had women like Petit Belle Lily, Petit Belle Lily, Boadicea, Alice Sugar, who were the famous chantwells in Port of Spain. And they had both male and female lovers. You know, Papi Mami was one of the chantwells. And, you know, there's this whole oral history of these women. So in them, I see the Wajang feminism, or the kind of feminism that Calypso Rose can embrace now. But, you know, I guess that Jamet culture disappeared, or because the women, they were so poor, and many of them ended up living in Hangman Cemetery there. So, you know, I just wondered if you saw continuities and discontinuities in a figure like Calypso Rose as related to these women from the 19th century, the chantwells of the 19th century.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks for that contribution, Joy. I was very happy to hear the likes of, you know, Alice Sugar, Petit Belle Lily, Boadicea, who were all Jamets, you know, and, you know, nowadays people think that, you know, Jamet was a prostitute, but, you know, we know very well Jamet was really a class of society. It came from the word Jamet, meaning from below the bar of society. And these women, chantwells back in the day, were of that class. And when Alison talks about Wajangism, it is just also an extension of the Jamet class, because the Jamet class was a construct that I would want to think that the colonizer put on us, you know, because you were not of their standing above that, above the bar. So the middle class and the upper class, you are a Jamet, you know, you're coming from below the class, that class, which were for women like Boadicea and Alice Sugar, Petit Belle and Lily, to be chantwells, singing in front of these, would have been stick fighters, calendar, right? They were the lead singers for various stickmen or boismen or batonnets. You know, it was seen as a space for men. You know, it was a man's space. And as women singing and being a part of that, that was not it was not seen as proper. And as you well know, that over the years, they were eventually silenced. And that is why, to me, up to this day, you know, the Calypso, although people like Rudolph Otley, Dr. Rudolph Otley would beg to defer, that to me, Calypso, the Calypso genre, the Calypso idiom, the Calypso space is still a very much a man's space. It is still very patriarchal, because the woman's voice through the likes of Boudicca and those women coming up the rank who were the early chantwells singing, they were silenced by the colonizer. Yeah. So in essence, when you have somebody like Calypso Rose, and prior to Calypso Rose, you had Lady Irie, who was one of the early women Calypsonians. Calypso Rose, by the time she came out in 1966, singing her Fire, Fire, because that is when we really, you know, knew of Calypso Rose, right? Her hit song of that year, 1966 Carnival, I do believe it was, with Fire, Fire. She was the first woman, really. I mean, as I said, there was Lady Irie, but there was something about Calypso Rose, you know, her defiance, the way in which she burst on the scene. That was something that was never ever before seen prior to her time, you know, coming into the Calypso arena. And at that time, she was seen as, you know, as she said in one of her interviews with me, that many women organization, church groups were calling her into meetings, telling her to get out of this thing called Calypso. It is not woman-like. It's not a space for a woman, you know. And she went through a whole lot of I would say prejudice, a lot of abuse, you know. And I say that word loosely, from various feminist organizations at the time, who was seen as, maybe the word feminist wasn't the word that was bandied about, but you know, all these various women organizations, which basically were church groups, right? Women groups in the church that were calling her into meetings and chastising her because she sang Calypso. So in essence, the silencing of P.T. Bell Lilly and those women to sing, the right to sing, at that time, you can see that it even extended to the time when Calypso Rose began her foray into the Calypso scene.
Okay, thank you, Rhoma. And I think, Joy, do you, okay, I think she's left. But I just wanted to say that we have to remember that Calypso Rose was not only a singer, she was an incredible composer. She has composed over 1,000 songs. So, I mean, she was fully expressive. Joy, would you like to say something else?
Yes, I just wanted to ask about tempo, because I believe it didn't only win Road March, it was also a Panorama winner too. So I was wondering who arranged it. I mean, I can't remember if I know she wrote it, right?
Yes, she writes all her songs.
Okay.
Yeah. And her arrangers arranged from people like Frankie McIntosh,
Ed Watson,
Pelham Goddard, Ed Watson.
Pelham, yeah.
This guy who his father, the Calypsonian who sang Ent, Ronnie McIntosh's father.
Frankie McIntosh.
No, that's he's Vincentian.
Art Dakota?
Art Dakota, yeah. From Art Dakota coming up. These are all the different arrangers, producers that she has worked with over the years. At least
would you like to weigh in as well?
Sure. I don't think I quite understand the question. Can you rephrase your question, Joy?
Okay. I don't know if could you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I was just asking about who arranged her songs, because I know especially tempo was very popular, and it was very popular in San Fernando because I grew up in the South, and it was one of the first calypsos that actually, talked about San Fernando and San Fernando Mass and San Fernando Carnival, so, it was kind of intervention too, because San Fernando Mass is different from Port of Spain Mass. And in San Fernando, there's, this celebration of the indigenous peoples in the fancy Indian Mass. So it was something that, San Fernando really celebrated when Tempo won Panorama.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a comment. It wasn't really a question.
I maybe you were not logged in yet, but I talked about how she wrote this song when she was living in New York, and she was working with Ralston Charles, who owned Charlie's Records. He is one of the kind of key figures in New York, or Brooklyn, I should say, who facilitated Calypsonians making recordings and distributing them. He also worked with Lord Kitchener and a number of other Calypsonians. So the arranger on Tempo is Pelham Goddard. It was kind of one of his first major outings with as an arranger.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joy. We don't have another question, so I wonder if any of the panelists would like to just comment on anything that we've heard or anything that you might have extra for us. Richard, is that a question?
Yeah, I do have a question, actually. First of all, thanks for everybody's very rich presentations. This is a question that's partly sparked by Anil's talk about Rose in France, which makes me, I remember the excitement of Fire in 1966, I'm that old, and went to see Rose. The first time I actually saw Rose live was in Toronto with Cobo Town, so a completely different kind of venue. And I was really struck thinking about these presentations of the evolution of Rose in status, the evolution of Rose musically, etc. And this is a question perhaps for Rhoma, but I think maybe Andal and Alison might have some thoughts. I'm wondering about Rose's status and how she figures in Trinidad and Tobago today and in her diaspora. And in the diaspora, because she's a different Rose to different people. Rhoma, I don't know if you were just recently in Trinidad. I just saw you there. What is your sense of how Rose, the different Roses, as what is her status? How is she thought about in these different sites? And Alison, you're in the United States. Andal's talked about France. Other people might have other thoughts about these different Roses, and I just thought it's an open question.
As she said in the interview, and I did allude to that in my paper, that she's still loved in Trinidad. She said, they still bow to me, man. Rose is, remember Rose, she has the highest order, the Order of Trinidad and Tobago, that she received in, I believe it was in 2018. But Rose is still seen as one of our, the only, Calypso queen. There are many various Calypso queens over the years. You have Singing Sandra, you have Stacy Sobers, who we will hear from later performing today, and please stay tuned for that. We have the three performers, Stacy Sobers, Calypso, Malcolm Efifi, and Susan Grogram will be performing later, right after this Q&A. But, Calypso Rose is still seen as the mother of all things Calypso. Many of the women Calypsonians today and soca artists look towards Calypso Rose as the ultimate queen. You have she's like, I will call her the Santua of Calypso. And to me, in Trinidad, that's what she is. You know, there's no ifs and buts about that.
Okay, maybe Alison and then Andel.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about as I was writing this, and Anil, I hope you take it up, is that, remember the guy, Farmer Nappy, had this song about how good the food is and you can't leave me just so, or whatever. I forget the name of the song. Somebody help me out here.
The song about
Hope. Do you? Yeah.
I'm trying to. It's time to trying to bring it to mind. Oh, you hooking me.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then the feminists took up Rose's, I think, and again, I'm from a distance, right? I'm in South Carolina looking at this, right? From what I was seeing, they took up Rose's Leave She Alone, right? And again, I don't think Rose wrote it for that purpose, right? But that is the kind of genius and the kind of, I think, openness and malleability of her as an artist, right? And she didn't, as far as I know, she didn't come out and say, no, don't use my song so, or that is how you must interpret my song. She let the people take the thing and do something with it. So Anil, over to you.
Yeah, Anil.
I see we should be wrapping up. So I'll just say quickly, I think I agree with everything Alison said. I think Rhoma's last clip, or one of the clips of Rose in which she talks about, here's a performer who's had an impact beyond Trinidad and has engaged, with the Garifuna in Belize, she mentioned Jamaica and Barbados. And I think what we see in her is a kind of, a real kind of example of the potential of creolization and creolity as a way in which culture evolves and grows. So I paid so much attention to that review of Rose's last album, because one of the things that kind of people who might regard themselves as like purists about the Calypso form is that, well, this doesn't sound like Calypso. Like what she's doing now doesn't sound like Calypso. But I think the point I was trying to make is that, in fact, it has to continue to evolve, because certainly like Calypso, the way in which the monarch competition changed and, really kind of narrowed what was considered Calypso, really kind of undermine its impact as a form. Like the way in which Calypso informed politics in 1970s, 80s, even into the 90s, Trinidad, never has had quite that impact again.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I know we're winding up, but I must allow this question from Yvonne Bob-Smith. Yvonne, you wrote in a question on Wajang feminism. Do you want to unmute and ask the question, please? You have to unmute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be in the presence of so many brilliant, inspirational leaders in the life of our country, the culture of our country. I'm still worried about feminism, because feminism is not a Caribbean word or thought. So when we put it with Wajang, we put it in the academy, we put it in the university. And I'll tell you why. I can't remember the name of the enslaved woman who wrote a biography. But I remember the story. She said that when her master called her to bathe him, she denounced her touching his parts. And she told him, "You are a dirty man." Now just think of that. I remember that well. I'll have to read the whole book for other things that she did on her own. Remember, she's in a room with this man. I come now right back to my lifetime. My mom used to say to me, "I want you to be a woman." And it puzzles me. It's only when I started to develop and then looked at how they were behaving as women. So therefore, I give a lot of respect to Caribbean womanism, because womanism means you're not leaving out man out of the struggle. It means you're fighting against him and you're fighting for him.
Okay.
And therefore, when you go now and think about this transgender, we are ready for that because you're fighting for people. But I don't think, and I have a number of young people around me who are not university educated, feminism, even today, is a foreign word to them. It doesn't mean the same thing, or what is that? Who is that? As a woman. And they don't mind saying, I'm a watcher. You know what I'm saying? I just want to throw it out there so that you might take a look at it and see if I am perceptive enough or correct enough in my interpretation of history. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you, Rama.
Okay. Thank you very
Roma.
much, Yvonne.
Thank you,
Roma,
Yvonne. Yes, Yvonne.
that lunch you didn't meet me to have. Okay.
I sent you a message. Check your email.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, just one brief comment from Christopher, who has been in the chat many times. He wants to answer something directly, and the other thing, Jennifer Walker is just commenting. So you look at the chat, those of you who are interested. Christopher, do you want to unmute and say something? Quickly, you wanted to answer 2 questions live. Christopher? No? Okay, well, I know we should be winding up. I will just...
I think we have one person with their hand.
I know. Inskip Spencer, go ahead. Could you unmute and go ahead, please? Inskip. Okay, I'm reluctant to wind up with a hand up, but I think maybe we have to do it. So we thank you very much. Thank you for all the participants, to all of the panelists, to everyone involved in this wonderful, wonderful symposium, both considering Calypso Rose's work and celebrating her. So we'll go on now to the next stage of the program, which is performance.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. And yes, thank you. Thanks, Roma, for organizing this.
Thank you, Rama.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our next part of the evening as we wrap up this evening's wonderful symposium, A Rose Among Thorns, Calypso Rose Life, Music and Impact. We have performing Makome Fifi, our 6 times Canadian Calypso monarch and undisputed Calypso Queen of Canada. We have Stacey Sobers as well, the 2018 Calypso Queen of, and also the Caribbean Calypso Queen of Queens from out of Trinidad and Tobago will be performing with us. And Susan G, who is the leader of Toronto's top soca band and lead vocalist of the top soca band, New Generation. Each of these women will each be performing 2 classics from Calypso Rose's composition. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we present first Makome Fifi, followed by Stacey Sobers and Susan Grogan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Makome Fifi, and it gives me great pleasure today to celebrate Calypso Rose. Now, Calypso Rose and I have something in common. We are both from the island of Tobago, the sister isle of Trinidad and Tobago. That's where Calypso Rose and I have in common. And today I'm going to celebrate Calypso Rose with 2 numbers, 2 of her numbers. One, Her Majesty, and the other one is I Thank Thee. So sit back, relax, and enjoy, ladies and gentlemen, the legend who is Calypso Rose.
I thank the mother of Tobago for being recognized everywhere I go. And I'm sure you will be glad to know that the mother of Tobago is Trinidad. I thank Trinidad for my education in making me a recognized woman. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. I thank Trinidad for my protection since 1970 revolution. So you see, Trinidad, I thank thee. I am not forgetting San Fernando for keeping my name for years, Queen of Calypso. I am not forgetting Barataria, the place where I grew with my adopted mother. I can't forget my fans who support me in my profession. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. And to the Baptist religion who gave me so much wisdom, glory be, I thank thee. The Prime Minister I cannot make absent, who took me safely through independence. And I cannot forget the mighty Sparrow who established my name through Calypso. I can't forget musicians who play my Calypso on brass and band. I say thanks, thanks, thanks. And to the nation in my esteem for making me road match queen. So you see, I thank thee. Oh, I say thanks, thanks, thanks. Oh, I thank thee. Trinidadians, what greatest musician, they know a good tune when they hear it croon. So when I drop me bomb in this song, they say it's class, give me the road march. Now they address me as your majesty. They say the music sweet, it make for the fans to beat. It have to be to jump on Carnival Day. The brass making me low, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the Road. Everybody hush, they say it was brainwash. Only Kitchener is all they don't care. That statement is not true. Plenty people lost their shoe. It was my new beat make trouble on the street. Now they address me as your majesty. They say the music sweet, it make for the fans to beat. It have to be to jump on Carnival Day. The brass making me low, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen children, lost their mom and friend. It was my new beat, was because of it. Man, when I drop me bomb, they're scoring all over town. They're prancing like mad to the new beat of Trinidad. Now they address me as your majesty. They say the music sweet, it makes for the fans to beat. It have to be to jump on Carnival Day. The brass making me low, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the Road. Get a vote, a hard work to drop high note. They ball out, oh Lord, oh Lord, listen to sweet chord. The bands could not resist, even all the tourists. They jumping like mad to the road march of Trinidad. Now they address me as your majesty. They say the music sweet, it makes for the fans to beat. It have to be to jump on Carnival Day. The brass making me low, they call me Queen, 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 Her Majesty, Queen of the Road.
Hi, my name is Stacey Sobers, 2018 National Calypso Queen of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's an honor to be here this afternoon with you all to share in the life and times of Calypso Rose, as put on by Rhoma Spencer. And I'll be doing 2 songs for you this afternoon. These 2 selections are Palette and Leave Me Alone. Hope you enjoy. Sing along if you know the chorus.
Is palette selling to make a shilling? Is palette selling for me living? That is my occupation, to be a palette woman. Put out your hand, I'm bound to stop. I'm selling me palette from 10 cents up. If you hear me, palette, palette, mama. A la pity palette, mama. La 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. A la 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. Ah! Hey, dum dang de, dum dang de, dum dang doy. I go in all about East, West, North and South. All down by the college, I have my privilege. I have all kind of flavor. Orange pine, sour, sap and vanilla. Ocean make you go through the rain. Coming down with the same refrain. If you hear me, palette, palette, mama. A la petite palette, mama. A la 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. A la 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 la. A la petite palette, mama. Yeah, dum dang de, dum dang de, dum dang do. From Sunday to Monday, I'm public holiday. I'm selling me palette. Me here have no limit. Anytime that you're thirsty, you could suck a palette from Rosie. I don't care if my business bust. I selling palette and I giving trust. If you hear me, palette, mama. A la petite palette, mama. La 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 let. A la petite palette, mama. A la 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 let. A la petite palette, mama. Dung dang de, dung dang de, dung dang de. As we get into the next song, I ask you to enjoy this one. Sing the chorus, right? Ah! Ah, gimme, 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 gimme. Boy, don't stop me like you're going crazy. Let go me hand, let me jump up in the back. I don't want nobody to come and stop me. Leave me, let me free up. Myself, let me jump up. What? Tell him. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. Let me party, let me party, let me party, let me party. Ah, gimme, 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 gimme. Play the music coming down Guy Street. Be there behind me, trying to stop me. Get out of my way. Leave me, let me ramouche. I ain't going home, no. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. Let me party, let me party, let me party. Ah, gimme, 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 gimme. One night you there, I had nothing to say. We're talking, cat and mouse you playing. I daily party, enjoying my body. With my friends I am happy. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. So leave me alone. I ain't going home. Let me party, let me party, let me party, let me party, let me party. Ah, gimme, 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 gimme. Ah! So leave me alone.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Grogan. I go as Susan G. I am the lead vocalist for and leader of the band New Generation. It's a privilege to be here this afternoon to celebrate in this symposium for Calypso Rose. I'm going to be doing two of her selections, Tempo and Fire Fire, and I hope you all would enjoy it.
It's too much to mention. Port of Spain too small for this carnival. I know it gon' happen. It was 77. These people like rain. Jamming Port of Spain, moving street hot, Charlotte street hot, skin up and hot, jumping and stop. We going down San Fernando. Down there have plenty tempo. Had to steal a extra jamming sweet. We will join San Fernandans and roll down Coffee Street. So give me more tempo. Ah, yeah. Woo! Masqueraders balling, the people are moving. You're getting tempo, we band moving slow. You're jumping from morning, for day until evening. You reach competition, all the judges gone. Savannah jump, Green Corner, St. Vincent we jump, with brass and tacks. Yo, we going down San Fernando. Down there have plenty tempo. At the steel orchestra jamming sweet. We will join San Fernandans and roll down Coffee Street. So give me more tempo. Water spinning up raw, it's too much mass galore. You can't get no room to jump anymore. San Fernando and so it's more mass and tempo, and plenty brand men to juke now and then. Main Street hot, Charlotte Street hot, skin up and hot, jumping and stop. We going down San Fernando. Down they have plenty tempo. Had to steal orchestra jamming sweet. We will join San Fernandans and roll down Coffee Street. So give me more tempo. Carnival is tempo, people want to let go. You can't jam the town when mass coming down. So I'll be on High Street, jumping to the sweet beat. So tell Port of Spain, I don't la rolling. New Street jump, Charlotte Street jump, in a part jump, jumping and stop. We going down San Fernando, down they have plenty tempo. Had to steal a extra jamming sweet. We will join San Fernandans and roll down Coffee Street. So give me more tempo. Give me, give me. Woo! Give me more. I'm going down San Fernando, down they have plenty tempo. Had to steal orchestra jamming sweet. We will join San Fernandans and roll down Coffee Street. So give me more tempo. I want tempo, I want tempo. Give me more tempo. I want tempo, I want tempo. Give me more tempo. if you hear me, fire, fire, in me wire, papa. Oh yeah, yo, ay, ay, ay. Fire, fire, dame cacalito, dame mucho agua y paso, mucho caliente. When my neighbor Ram seen, he came running. Thought it was a joke because he didn't see no smoke. He balled up a murder Ram see. Where's the ladder? Oh, with the hose and let go the water to out the fire. And if you hear me, fire, fire, in me wire, wire. Oh yeah, yo, ay, ay, ay. Fire, fire, vende cacalito, dame mucha agua y paso. Fire, fire, in me wire, papa. Oh yeah, yo, ay, ay, ay. Fire, fire, dame cacalito, dame mucha agua y paso. Arriba. I came with fire to give you the fire, to take the fire. It's only fire. I bring the fire. I jam it with fire. So keep the fire. I baptize you with fire. It's only fire. So give me the fire. So bring the fire. It's only fire. I bring you the fire. I jam it the fire. So keep the fire. I baptize you with fire. Trinidad on fire. Tobago got fire. Belize on fire. Barbados got fire. Antigua got fire. St. Vincent got fire. Jamaica on fire. So give me the fire. I baptize you with fire. Fire, 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 fire. It's only, it's only, it's only, it's only, it's only. I came with fire to give you the fire, so take out the fire. It's only fire.
Christopher will do a vote of thanks now.
And so, my gosh, because as a talker, but first and foremost, this event would not have been possible without the generous support of our co-sponsors, the Center for Caribbean Studies and the Women and Gender Studies Institute at University of Toronto. Thank you to all the wonderful Rhoma, Allison, Hope. All of you gave us such insightful ways to think about the legacy of Calypso Rose. I must highlight the amazing Rhoma Spencer, artist in residence at the Queer and Trans Research Lab, who convened this lovely event today. Events such as this symposium could not happen without support of community, whether we are here or abroad. So a thank you to Uncle Errol Fabian at Gael TV in Trinidad, who assisted with the recording of Stacy Sober's performance. Additional thank yous to Jan Morgan, Kevin Cesario, and Levon Cadogan. Apologies if I mispronounced that. A very special thank you to our multimedia specialist, Elliot Tilachek, for the magnificent work bringing everything together behind the scenes. You are a boss. As the symposium comes to a close, I would like to thank all of you in the audience who spent the afternoon with us today. We have people joining us from all over the world, which speaks to the global impact of our monarch, Calypso Rose. And with that, I wish everyone a lovely weekend.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Roma, so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.